Here we are in step number 4 of the invisible part sew-in hairstyle. In this step, I will be sharing with you 7 of my best tips and tricks for doing your style. Tip number 1, the distance between your tracks and your thread knots. When you are sewing on your tracks onto your head, you want to make sure that they're a good distance apart. You don't want your tracks to be sewn too close together, which creates a bulky look, or too far apart, which creates a spacey look. I like to use my hands as a guide for how far apart I want my tracks and my knots to be. So as a guide, simply use your index finger to test how far apart each track is. You want to snugly be able to slide your index finger in between each track layer to make sure they're at a good distance. So one of your tracks should be gently against the bottom of your index finger, while one is positioned on top of your index finger. Using your finger as a guide helps you to sew your extensions close enough to one another, but not too far apart. Also, the distance between your knots are key. When you are sewing and you are knotting your extensions, you want to make sure that you use your hands again as a guide for how far apart you want your knots to be. You can make your knots as close as you would like, but it's unnecessary. One thing you want to make sure is that your knots aren't too far apart, because this will allow area of error. Some of your tracks could simply slide out of your head because your knots aren't too close. So what I like to do is use the break of either my index finger, so from the break of my finger to the tip of my finger, or use my pinky finger. They're both kind of about the same size. So from the first break of your index finger to the tip of your index finger is the distance that you want to have from one knot to another. This ensures once again that your knots aren't too close together or far apart for your style. Tip number 2, when to double knot. When you are sewing on your extensions, there are 3 instances that you need to make sure that you double knot your extensions. Every time you begin to sew on your extensions, it is a must that you double knot at the beginning of your extension piece through the weft. You simply go through the weft once and twice and do 2 knots at the very beginning. This ensures that the very beginning of your extension pieces will not begin to lift as your style ages. Then as you go along and sew and reach the end of the extension piece, you want to make sure that you double knot the very end as well. In the 3rd instance, you must double knot your extensions when you do the fold over method. Once you have sewn down far enough and you need to flip your track piece over just to begin sewing a new row, at that very point where the track piece starts to lift at its fold, you want to make sure that you double knot that spot. So in those 3 instances, those are the only times that you need to double knot your thread onto your extensions. This ensures that your style will look flat and that your track pieces will not start to lift in certain areas. Tip number 3, through the weft and under the weft. When you are sewing on your extensions, as you know, every time you begin to put your extension piece onto your head, you must sew through the weft. A lot of people don't suggest ever sewing through the weft, but when you sew through the weft, this ensures that your style will lay as flat as possible. That is the number 1 problem with any sew-in hairstyle, is that at the beginning of the weft extension, it starts to lift, simply because number 1, it has not been double knotted, and number 2, the person who did it, or if you have sewn it on, you haven't went through the weft. I only suggest going through the weft at the beginning of your track piece. Now, to go under the weft, you will do that through your entire style. Once you have passed the beginning or the very end of a track piece, you will go underneath the weft to sew and hold down your tracks. Remember, you're only going through the weft at the beginning and end of a track piece, but you're always going to go underneath the weft throughout your entire sewing process. Tip number 4, beauty is not pain. If you or if anyone you know may have issues with alopecia or even hair loss, one of the leading reasons why is because a lot of times they may get their extensions installed too tightly. Make sure that when you are sewing your hair, or if anyone is sewing your hair, for your invisible part style that is done properly and comfortably. You want to be able to wear your style without any pain. If at any moment it's hard for you to lay on your head, or you simply have to go throughout the day by taking pain medication, that's your body letting you know that your extensions are installed too tightly. By constantly having tight styles in your hair, you will eventually lose hair. It always happens. So make sure when you sew on your extensions, it does not hurt. Make sure that it's done comfortably and properly. So in the case that beauty is pain, that is not true because beauty is not pain. Tip number 5, braiding close to your roots. When you are braiding your braid pattern for your invisible part hairstyle, you want to make sure that your braids are as flat as possible. This does not mean you have to braid them as tight as you can. Remember, they need to be installed properly and comfortably. By making sure you braid as comfortable, close to your roots as you can, this ensures that when you sew on your hair extensions, it looks more realistic because the extensions will be more flat to your head. So as you're braiding your hair, just be cautious and do what's comfortable, and make sure that you braid as close to your roots as you can. Tip number 6, practicing with synthetic hair. I highly suggest for beginners that if you are new to doing your hair, or if you're actually new to doing the invisible part style, to first practice with synthetic hair. Synthetic hair is extremely cheap, so if you make a mistake, cut your extensions, or simply can't sew it on right, you will do so with hair that is extremely inexpensive. If this is your first time going into your style, please do not buy expensive hair to begin with. If you make a mistake, if you cut the hair, what can you really do about it? You want to make sure that you first have mastered the style before you choose to buy pricey hair, and then the whole thing turns into a big mess. So continue practicing with your style and do so with synthetic hair. If you make a mistake, there's no loss, there's only a gain because the hair is cheap before you actually decide to use a more expensive hair extension. Last but not least, tip number 7, go at your own pace. Go at your own pace when you are doing your hair. Your hair is what you have to live with, so treat it nice and be comfortable as you are doing your style. Some people can get their hair done literally in half an hour or maybe even 10 minutes. Some people, it's an all-day event. However long it takes you, do what you have to do to make sure your extensions are installed properly and comfortably. Don't be distraught or upset that someone is quicker than you or that you're even slow at doing your own hair. If you go at your own pace, that leaves less room for mistakes and more chances of you actually getting the style that you would like. So those are 7 of my best tips, tricks, and advice for doing your invisible part style. In the next step, step number 5, I will show you in detail how to sew on your hair for your invisible part.